Hey y'all, welcome to part 2 in this series and the first video of the CNC router build. What kind of CNC router? Well, as you can see behind me, we're talking about an Avid 4848 Pro Series CNC router. So, I won't bore you with a lot of talk. Let's go ahead and get right into the assembly of this machine. I started out on day 1 by opening up the leg kit for the Avid CNC. Getting everything organized was another priority for me. And when it comes to the hardware, there is a lot of it. I would highly recommend getting a bunch of small containers like you see here, because there is a lot to sort through and keep track of. Now, I have raved about how great the Avid CNC instructions are, and I'm serious about this. One of the pro tips they put in the build instructions were to use a little bit of tape to hold these connectors in place while you're moving around. Now you can see I'm using my Porter cable 20-volt drill to drive in these socket head cap screws. I have the torque set to about halfway. I just want to drive them in. I will go around and hand torque everything after I get them installed. The feet just screwed into the bottom of the plate at the end of the legs. And if you happen to have one that's a little bit tough going, just know that that lock nut, it takes a 1-inch wrench. Now, if you have the room in your shop, don't do what I'm doing here. Lay the legs and cross members down and assemble them that way. I did not have the room to do that with all of the boxes, all of the extrusion, and everything else in my shop. I just simply didn't have the room. So I built them on this little bitty table. Then it was time to assemble the frame. Now again, the instructions are pretty straightforward here. These roll-in T-nuts took a little bit of getting used to, in that it's very easy to drive the socket head cap screw into the T-nut too far, and then it wouldn't fit into the extrusion. It was also fairly easy to not drive them in far enough and have them fall off inside the channel. Then it was time to go through and find all of the top rails and cross members and get them prepared for installation. again, I did have to loosen and or tighten a few of these T-nuts to get the rails to slide into position. Now, Avid recommends that you get hold of a long reach 6mm Allen driver head, and that does come in handy. But do know that you will also need a 5mm and a 4mm, which Avid does not call out. Now, I didn't know that at this time, so when it came time to start driving in all the 4mm and 5mm socket head cap screws, I did them all by hand. Spacing the cross members was pretty straightforward as per the directions from Avid. And here you can see that I'm using a little bit of a rubber-headed persuader. Once again, there's a balancing act when using these slide-in T-nuts, in that you can drive the socket head cap screw in too far or not quite far enough. And there's a little bit of a balance there that you have to kind of find. And once you get there, it's pretty straightforward. Now, a tip that I got from Joey over at Steel Blade Woodworks is, once you get to about this point, put that machine frame where it's going to live, because you are not going to be moving it by yourself. It is that heavy. So get it where you want it to be and build the rest of the machine there. And once again, I have my drill set for 1/2 of its max torque, and went back and tightened everything down by hand. Putting the leg gussets in was a little fiddly. Some of them went in easy, some of them needed a little bit more fiddling. The important part here is to get the mitered corners flush against the leg and the frame rail. Now, off camera, I dropped that electronics bar there on the right side down close to the bottom of the legs and used my drill to tighten up all of the fasteners there, then torqued them by hand, then brought that rail up to its proper location. Now, this back corner gusset here gave me a little bit of trouble, and I spent more time fiddling with it than I did any of the others. For some reason, it did not want to sit flush, but I eventually persuaded it to. With all the gussets in place, once again, I went ahead and squared it up. and then tightened all the leg gussets down, both with the drill and by hand. My point here with all of this is do not count on your drill to apply the proper torque. Use your hands. You know when you're applying enough force. Then it was time to put all the nuts and bolts on the linear rails, and there are a bunch of them. I found that by propping one end of the linear rail up on a piece of scrap 2x6, it spaced it up enough to where I could thread all the T-nuts onto those little socket head cap screws. It really helped out a lot. And the linear rails slid right into the top groove of the extrusion. Then I loosely snugged up a couple of fasteners along each side. Then got out the alignment jigs. Now, these jigs are machined blocks of aluminum that you can see me installing right here, and used a couple of 4-inch C-clamps to draw those linear rails up tight against those alignment jigs, then went down the line and by hand drove in all of those screws, then came back and torqued them all. This is where the 4 and 5 millimeter drill driver will come in handy. The linear rails slid into that extrusion slot nice and easy. The gear tracks were a little bit more picky. I don't know if it's these fasteners or exactly what it is, but the gear tracks were a little bit more fiddly. I had to make absolutely certain I had the proper amount of the socket head cap screw driven into the T-nut to get it to even slide down the extrusion slot. You can see in this shot that a couple of screws fell out, and I had to go back and shift them back and forth and put them back in. And I used a little block of wood to move the gear track back and forth in that extrusion to get it into its proper position. Pushing on a block of wood was easier on the hands than pushing on that gear track. Then once I got it into place, I torqued everything by hand. Now the bearing blocks have a machined index surface on the top. You can see it, shiny metal right there. When you put the grease fittings in, you need to make sure that that index surface stays pointed up, and you put those grease fittings in the proper orientation. They should face outwards. 2 towards the front of the machine, 2 towards the back of the machine. And sliding the blocks onto the linear rails was as simple as it looks. Then greasing up the blocks. And of course, it's law, you have to run them back and forth a couple times. Assembling the dust covers were pretty straightforward. They're a two-piece affair, a longer piece and a shorter piece. I put the shorter piece towards the back. And these are covers that help protect the linear rails, keep you from dropping things onto the linear rails, and help keep sawdust out of the way. And they just slid into that top extrusion slot and go down the line and torque them all down by hand. Then it was time to install the bumpers and bumper plates. These will also be where the sensor flags for the Y-axis will be mounted. And I lost the footage to that. It's at this point here that you need to make sure this beast is where it's going to be, because after this point, it's too heavy to move by yourself. Because now we get into adding the riser plates in preparation for mounting the gantry. And this again was pretty straightforward. Mounting the riser plates themselves was also very straightforward. And once you get everything tightened down, you have to move it back and forth on the rail. There are a lot of these socket head cap screws and roll-in T-nuts. And these will hold those riser blocks I assembled a second ago. The only special note is the bottom two need to be facing the opposite direction. They need to be pointed upwards. But other than that, they just slid into place. And I used the driver to drive all the bolts home and then come back and torqued them all by hand. These tie plates, I spent a lot of time getting them in the right position, only to realize a little bit later on I was going to be loosening them up when it was time to install the gantry beam. And that's where we're going to leave off for part one of this assembly series. Now, I told you from the outset that I was going to keep track of my time and let you know how long each of these major assemblies took. Now, up to the point you saw in this video where I had the frame built and the riser blocks on, not yet ready to put the gantry in place, I had roughly 9 hours involved in the build. Now, I did not have a full day to work on the machine at that particular time, so what you saw took place over 3 days, a couple hours at a whack. So not that much time involved. And to be honest, I spent a little bit more time fiddling with the gear track on this side of the machine than I probably should have. Now, I don't know if it was the way the gear track was drilled. I don't know if there was a roughness in the extrusion or what, but those two things conspired to make this side a little bit more difficult to get installed than this side was. This side was fairly simple. This one gave me a little bit of a problem. And once again, I used those little pieces of 2x4 and a little piece of 2x6 to push against the front of that gear track because it was easier on the hands than trying to shove on that steel, especially with a whole bunch of teeth all over it. So just know that going in. Those T-nuts are a little bit fiddly. The reason they're fiddly is because they protrude out from the surface of the T-nut just a little bit to follow the slot on the side of that extrusion. And if you have that nut pushed too far back, it's going to rub against the inside of that extrusion and prevent you from pushing it in. If it's too far out, the same thing. Now, you saw in the video a couple of bolts dropped out over on this side. Yeah, that happened. So I had to, push it backwards, find that T-nut in the extrusion, put they're button head screws for those. I said socket head cap screws. They're button head. But regardless, I had to go back and forth and find that and then put the button head screw in, and then I could move it forward, find the next one, and tighten it all up. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. Now, as I mentioned in the video, Avid calls out a 6mm long reach Allen head driver that will go into the drill. You'll notice I said drill. I did not use my impact driver at all on this. I don't want to over torque something, and my driver, I can't adjust the torque on it. I can, however, adjust the torque on the drill. The torque settings on this drill goes up to 20, and I had it set at 12 as I was driving them in. And going back with a Allen wrench and torquing things by hand, I turned them maybe a quarter of a turn to get the right level of torque onto the fastener. You know how much is too tight and how much is not tight enough. So use your judgment on that. I don't know of a real torque value. The 6mm Allen head driver was very, very necessary for connecting all the frame pieces. And you do need the extended reach. For the other sizes, 4mm and 5mm, you don't need these extended reach. Just a short driver that'll go in the drill. Believe me, there's a lot of fasteners. The linear rails, the gear tracks on the table, plus the linear rails across the front of the gantry, plus the gear track on top of the gantry. Those are all the 5mm, and you will need to use the drill driver for that. I did them all by hand, and the first day, my fingers were pretty much raw from handling one of those little Allen wrenches and tightening everything down. Also, Avid calls for the blue 242 thread locker, Loctite, or whichever brand thread locker. I would probably go with the stick if I had it to do over again. I had this, so I used it. But the liquid thread locker can be a bit messy. So I think if I had to do it all over again, I would go for the stick type. Other than that, if you have a metric tape, that will help you. I have a machinist scale that is imperial fractions on one side, millimeters on the other, and that was mainly used to set the sensor flags over here in the bumper, and that's the y-axis sensors. So I think that's about all of the tips that I have for this video. Just think of this entire assembly process and think of the Avid CNC kit as a giant erector set. I know that dates me because do kids even play with erector sets anymore? But think of it as a giant erector set with fabulous online instructions that you can download in PDF format and keep on your computer or on a tablet or even your phone if you can read that small. And follow those instructions. Watch the pro tip videos. There are a few sections that have pro tip videos there on the instruction pages. And the assembly will go real easily. So we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up part 2 of the Avid CNC series, part 1 of the assembly. Next week we will get into assembling the gantry and assembling the Z-axis and the whole thing. If you'd like to continue to follow along on this adventure in building and exploring the Avid CNC 4848 Pro, I do hope you'll subscribe to my channel. If you would like to further support this channel, I do hope you'll consider becoming a channel member. Now there's a link in the description box below, or you can just click the join button right there next to the subscribe button. A panel will pop up and give you all of the information you need on channel membership. Now I know folks are going to have a lot of questions on the assembly of this Avid CNC. So, as usual, today at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, I'll be hosting a live Q&A session where you can ask me any question you'd like about the Avid CNC or about any other video here on my channel. That's today at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on my YouTube channel, and I've put a link to that live Q&A session down on the description box of this video. Now these live Q&A sessions are a great reason to go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. And when you click that red subscribe button, click that little notification bell right next to it. Then click it a second time and set that menu to all notifications. Then you'll get a notification the next time I post a video and the next time I go live. So I hope to see you this afternoon for the live Q&A session. And as always, whether you subscribe to my channel or not, whether you become a channel member or not, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch, and y'all take care.